The rain hit the rooftop like shattered glass, as Jungkook tightened his trembling fingers around the old silver necklace hidden beneath his shirt, whispering, "Some wounds only survive because nobody knows they exist." City lights below Seoul blurred into streaks of gold and crimson, swallowed by the storm that had arrived without warning. Jimin pushed open the heavy metal door leading to the rooftop, his breathing uneven. Jungkook. The younger man didn't turn around. His black hoodie was soaked, clinging to his broad shoulders as if carrying a burden far heavier than rainwater. Taehyung followed closely behind, concern written across his face. "We've been looking everywhere for you," Taehyung said. Silence. Only thunder answered. Jimin stepped forward carefully. "Why did you leave the dinner without saying anything?" Another silence. The truth was that neither Jimin nor Taehyung had noticed how absent Jungkook had become over the past months. The smiles were still there. The laughter remained perfect. The teasing, the jokes, the playful energy everyone adored, it all existed. But only on the surface, deep beneath that carefully built mask was a loneliness that had grown roots. And Jungkook had become an expert at pretending. Finally, he spoke. "I'm tired." His voice was so quiet that the rain nearly swallowed it. Jimin frowned. "Tired from what?" A faint smile appeared on Jungkook's lips, the kind of smile that carried no happiness. "Everything." Answer lingered between them. Taehyung exchanged a worried glance with Jimin. Because that wasn't like him. Jungkook had always been the strongest one, the one who carried others, the one who protected, the one who endured. At least, that was what everyone believed. What nobody knew was that 3 years earlier, a single phone call had changed everything. And Jungkook had never recovered. The necklace beneath his shirt belonged to someone whose name he hadn't spoken aloud in years, someone he had promised never to forget. Someone whose absence still haunted every quiet night. The thunder roared again. Jimin walked closer. Did something happen? Jungkook finally turned. The city reflected in his dark eyes. For a brief moment, Jimin saw something he had never seen before. Fear, not ordinary fear, the kind that came from carrying pain for too long, the kind that exhausted the soul. But just as quickly, it vanished. Jungkook smiled again, the familiar smile, the safe smile, the lie. "Nothing happened," he said, and Jimin believed him. That was what hurt the most. Later that night, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Taehyung sat on the living room couch, absent-mindedly turning the television channels. "I don't think he's okay," he murmured. Jimin stood near the kitchen window. The rain continued outside. He said he's fine. Taehyung laughed softly. Since when does Jungkook tell people when he's not fine? The question remained unanswered. Because the truth was obvious, never. Jungkook had built an entire life around silence. Meanwhile, inside his room, the darkness welcomed him like an old friend. The small lamp near his bed illuminated only fragments of his face. On the bedside drawer rested a worn-out notebook. The cover had faded. The corners had been repaired countless times. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were handwritten letters, letters that nobody else had ever read, letters addressed to someone who no longer existed in his world. His fingers stopped on one particular page. The date was from 3 years ago. The night everything changed. His chest tightened. The memories returned, the hospital corridors, the unbearable smell of antiseptic, the cold winter wind, the promise he failed to keep. He closed the notebook immediately. Breathing became difficult. Outside his door, footsteps approached. A gentle knock followed. "Jungkook." Jimin, the younger man, remained silent. Another knock. "Can I come in?" Still silence. After several moments, Jimin sighed. "Okay, good night." Footsteps faded. Only then did Jungkook close his eyes. He hated this, the distance, the lies. But he hated something else even more, the possibility of becoming someone's burden. Ever since that winter, he had convinced himself of one thing. People leave, people disappear, and love, no matter how sincere, always arrives with the risk of losing everything. So he chose silence, because silence was safer. The following morning brought sunlight, but no warmth. Jungkook woke earlier than everyone else, a habit born from years of sleepless nights. The kitchen was empty. He prepared coffee with mechanical precision. 1 spoon of sugar, no milk, exactly the way he had always done. Routine was comforting, predictable. Nothing unexpected could happen inside routines. Yet his hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. The old scar on his wrist ached, not visible enough for anyone to notice, but enough to remind him. The past never truly disappeared. It simply waited. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Taehyung entered first. His messy hair and sleepy expression made him look younger. "Awake already?" Jungkook nodded. "Couldn't sleep." Taehyung sat beside him for a while. Neither spoke. The morning sunlight painted long shadows across the room. Then Taehyung said something unexpected. "You know, I envy you sometimes." Jungkook blinked. "You always seem so strong." Coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Strong, that word again. People loved calling him strong, as if strength meant never breaking, never crying, never asking for help. Jungkook looked down. "If someone looks strong all the time," he said quietly, "maybe it's because they don't know how to ask others to carry things with them." Taehyung froze. The sentence felt heavier than it should have. Before he could respond, Jungkook stood. "I need to go out." "Where?" "Just somewhere." Answer ended the conversation. Hours later, Jimin found himself staring at an old photograph. It had been hidden inside one of their shared albums. The picture showed Jungkook years ago, standing beside someone whose face had been partially torn away. Only half the photograph remained. Jimin frowned. He had never seen this before. The expression on Jungkook's face was different, genuine, carefree, happy, the kind of happiness that came from feeling completely safe. Taehyung approached. "What is that?" "I don't know." Silence that followed carried growing unease, because they suddenly realized something. They knew Jungkook's favorite foods, his sleeping habits, the songs he listened to, the jokes he repeated. But they didn't know his past, not really. There were entire chapters of his life that remained locked away, entire storms he had survived alone. And perhaps those storms had never truly ended. That evening, Jungkook returned home much later than usual. His clothes smelled faintly of old books and rain. The silver necklace remained hidden beneath his shirt. Jimin waited in the living room. "So," he said softly, "who was in that photo?" The world seemed to stop. For the first time in years, genuine panic crossed Jungkook's face. A terrifying silence filled the room. Taehyung emerged from the kitchen. Neither of them understood why such a simple question could change everything. Jungkook looked toward the hallway, toward his room, toward the notebook hidden inside the drawer, the notebook containing every truth he had spent years burying. His heartbeat thundered. And somewhere deep within his soul, the wound he had protected for so long finally began to crack open. The night air inside the apartment suddenly felt suffocating. Jungkook stood motionless near the entrance, his fingers tightening around the strap of his bag until his knuckles turned white. Jimin had never seen that expression before. Not fear, not anger, something much deeper, something fragile. "Who was in that photo?" Jimin repeated carefully. Taehyung remained silent, sensing that one wrong word might shatter whatever invisible balance Jungkook had been maintaining. The younger man looked away. The soft laughter that usually lived in his eyes was gone. "Why are you asking about that?" he finally said. His voice was calm, too calm. Jimin stood from the sofa. "I found it by accident." Silence. Picture looked old. Another silence. "And you looked happy." The last sentence struck harder than intended. For a brief second, Jungkook's expression softened. Happy. He couldn't even remember the last time someone had described him that way. Not the version everyone saw, not the cheerful performer, not the dependable friend, but genuinely happy. The memory arrived without permission. A bright summer afternoon, a motorcycle ride along the Han River, laughter so loud that strangers turned to look, and a promise spoken beneath golden sunset skis. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Jungkook lowered his head. "Just someone from a long time ago." Jimin frowned. "Someone important?" The question hung in the room. Taehyung watched quietly. He noticed the subtle details, the way Jungkook avoided eye contact, the slight trembling in his left hand, the exhausted look hidden beneath his composed expression. These were things he had never paid attention to before. And suddenly, guilt settled inside his chest. How long had their friend been suffering alone? How many times had he smiled while carrying unbearable pain? Jungkook exhaled. Some memories are better left alone. Then he walked past them. The conversation was over, or at least, that was what he wanted them to believe. Hours later, the city fell asleep. The apartment became silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the gentle rhythm of rain returning against the windows. Jungkook sat on the floor of his room. The old notebook rested beside him. He hadn't opened it. Not yet. The silver necklace lay in his palm. Its surface had become worn over the years, but the engraving remained visible. A single date, one he could never forget. He closed his hand around it. His breathing grew heavier. The worst part about grief wasn't the sadness. It was the loneliness. The realization that life continued moving while one part of your soul remained trapped in the past. He had learned that lesson the hard way. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Not Jimin, not Taehyung, 3 gentle knocks, the same pattern every time. Taehyung. "Can I come in?" Jungkook remained quiet. The door opened slowly. Taehyung stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. The room was dimly lit. Warm light painted soft shadows across the walls. He sat beside Jungkook without asking questions, without forcing conversation. Minutes passed, the steam from the tea curled into the air. Finally, Taehyung spoke. "When I was younger, my grandmother used to tell me something." Jungkook said nothing. She said people who smile the brightest are sometimes the ones most afraid of being a burden. Younger man's fingers tightened around the necklace. His heartbeat quickened. Taehyung continued. "I didn't understand back then." He looked toward his friend. "But I think I do now." Room became unbearably quiet. Rain tapped gently against the glass. Jungkook stared at the floor. "You don't understand anything," he whispered. The words carried no anger, only exhaustion. Taehyung nodded. "Maybe I don't." Another silence. "But I want to." For years, Jungkook had avoided those words. "I want to know, I want to help, I want to stay," because those promises terrified him. People always meant them at first, until life changed, until circumstances changed. Until they left, the old wound inside him began aching again. He remembered sitting in a hospital corridor, remembered cold fluorescent lights, remembered waiting for a miracle that never came. The smell of medicine still haunted him. The silence afterward had been worse, much worse. His voice became almost inaudible. Sometimes, Taehyung listened carefully. Sometimes people only get hurt when they know the truth. Statement carried years of pain. Taehyung's heart sank. What truth? Jungkook closed his eyes. The answer refused to leave his lips, because speaking it aloud would make everything real again, and he wasn't ready, not even now. The next morning arrived with clear skies. Jimin woke earlier than usual. The conversation from last night refused to leave his mind. He entered the kitchen and found Taehyung already there. Neither looked particularly rested. "You couldn't sleep either?" Jimin asked. Taehyung shook his head. "He isn't okay." Certainty in his voice was unsettling. Jimin sat down. "What happened last night?" Taehyung hesitated. He looked broken. The word lingered, broken. Not weak, not sad, broken. Jimin suddenly remembered countless moments over the years, times when Jungkook quietly disappeared after celebrations, the way he sometimes stared into nothing during rainy evenings, the habit of sleeping with soft music playing all night, the small silver necklace he never removed, all those details they had ignored, all those silent cries hidden beneath ordinary routines. A painful realization settled between them. They had mistaken resilience for healing. And perhaps Jungkook had never truly healed at all. Meanwhile, Jungkook stood alone at a small bookstore several blocks away. It was an old place. The owner greeted him with familiar kindness. "Back again?" Jungkook offered a small smile. "Just for a little while." The elderly man nodded. No questions. That was why Jungkook loved this place. Silence was respected here. In the far corner stood a wooden shelf filled with poetry books. A particular volume caught his attention. The same one someone had given him years ago. His fingers brushed against its spine. Memory flooded his mind. "You always read sad poems." A voice from the past, warm, teasing, beautiful. Jungkook had laughed, because happy endings aren't realistic. Person beside him had smiled. "Then I'll prove you wrong." Memory shattered, reality returned. His chest tightened. The promise had never been fulfilled. Life had chosen a different ending. Outside, clouds gathered once more. The weather seemed to understand things humans could not. By evening, Jungkook returned home carrying nothing. Yet his shoulders appeared heavier. Jimin waited near the dining table. This time, he didn't ask about the photograph. He didn't ask about the necklace. Instead, he spoke quietly. "Do you want to eat together?" Jungkook stopped. Simple words, ordinary words. But something inside him wavered. Years of isolation had taught him that accepting kindness came with risks, that dependence created vulnerability, that opening one's heart invited inevitable pain. Yet another part of him, a much smaller, weaker part, simply wanted to stop being alone. He looked at Jimin, then at Taehyung, who was setting the table without saying anything. No pressure, no expectations, just waiting. The warmth of home suddenly felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. And for the first time in years, Jungkook wondered whether silence had truly protected him, or merely imprisoned him.
The smell of warm soup filled the apartment, but Jungkook stood frozen near the doorway as if crossing the distance to the dining table required more courage than anyone could imagine. Taehyung carefully placed the last bowl down. Jimin looked at him with quiet patience, no questions, no pressure, just a simple invitation. "Come eat before it gets cold," Jimin said softly. The words carried an unexpected gentleness. Jungkook swallowed. His instincts told him to retreat to his room, to maintain the familiar walls he had built over the years, Distance had always been safer. Distance meant control. Distance meant nobody could see the cracks. Yet tonight felt different. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he walked toward the table. Taehyung smiled, a genuine smile, not one filled with concern or pity, just happiness that Jungkook had chosen to stay. A small gesture tightened something inside his chest. He sat down. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. Rain had started again outside, tapping softly against the windows. The city lights beyond the glass flickered like distant stars. For a few moments nobody spoke, then Taehyung broke the silence. Remember when Jungkook almost burned the kitchen trying to make pancakes? Jimin burst into laughter. Oh, that was terrible. Jungkook blinked. What? The smoke alarm nearly exploded, Jimin continued. And you kept insisting everything was under control. Taehyung laughed harder. He looked at us and said, real chefs create their own methods. A small smile escaped Jungkook before he realized it, the first real smile in weeks. Jimin noticed and his heart felt strangely lighter, because perhaps the distance between them wasn't impossible to cross. Perhaps later that night after dinner Taehyung returned to his room. Jimin remained in the living room organizing old photo albums scattered across the table. Jungkook intended to leave, but his feet stopped. One photograph had fallen onto the floor. It showed the three of them during happier times. Jimin picked it up. You remember this? Jungkook looked at it. Summer, Busan, bright sunlight, carefree laughter. His expression softened. That trip was exhausting, he said. Jimin grinned. You loved every second of it. Silence followed, gentler than before. Then Jimin spoke again. I ask you something? Jungkook's shoulders stiffened, stared at the photograph. When was the last time you were truly happy? The question struck harder than any accusation. The room suddenly felt colder. The rain outside grew louder. Jungkook didn't answer because he knew the exact moment. He remembered every detail, the warmth of someone's hand, the orange sky above the river, a promise whispered with absolute sincerity, and the following winter that destroyed everything. His fingers unconsciously reached for the necklace beneath his shirt. Jimin noticed, but remained silent. After several long moments, Jungkook finally spoke. A long time ago. His voice sounded distant, like someone speaking from another lifetime. Jimin nodded. I figured. No judgment, no pity, just understanding, and somehow that made everything more difficult, because understanding was dangerous. Understanding meant someone could eventually reach the parts of himself he had spent years hiding. Inside his room later that evening, Jungkook opened the old notebook again. The pages smelled faintly of paper and time. His handwriting had changed over the years. The older entries looked more hopeful, more alive. He stopped at one particular letter. The date was 4 days before the accident. His eyes moved slowly across the words. I think happiness scares me because every beautiful thing feels temporary. You always tell me to stop worrying about tomorrow. You say people should treasure the present. I wish I could think like you. I wish I could believe that good things stay. A soft exhale escaped his lips. The person who received those letters would never read them. Yet Jungkook continued writing year after year, as if speaking into silence was better than forgetting. His phone suddenly vibrated, an unknown number. He stared at the screen. The message contained only a single sentence. I found something that belonged to him. Jungkook's blood turned cold. The world stopped moving. His breathing became shallow. No, impossible. Nobody knew. Nobody was supposed to know. Sender included an address, an old neighborhood on the outskirts of Seoul, a place Jungkook hadn't visited in years. His hands began trembling. The carefully sealed door to his past had suddenly been forced open. And behind that door waited memories he had spent years running from. The next morning, Taehyung noticed something immediately. Jungkook was gone. The apartment was unusually quiet. The coffee machine remained untouched. His room was empty. Only the old notebook was missing. Jimin entered the kitchen. Did he already leave? Taehyung frowned. Something feels wrong. A strange uneasiness settled over both of them. Jungkook never disappeared without saying anything, not anymore. Meanwhile, heavy clouds gathered above the city. Jungkook sat alone on a bus traveling toward the old district. The buildings outside gradually changed. Modern streets gave way to older neighborhoods, places filled with memories, places that still carried ghosts. His heart pounded against his ribs. The necklace remained tightly clenched in his hand. The message replayed endlessly inside his mind. I found something that belonged to him, after all these years, after all this silence. Why now? The bus finally stopped. Jungkook stepped onto familiar ground. The air smelled exactly the same, wet pavement, old trees, summer rain. His chest tightened. Every corner contained fragments of another life, a happier one. A life before loss taught him how cruel the world could be. He followed the address. An old bookstore stood quietly at the end of the street. The sign above the entrance had faded with time. The owner, now much older, looked up as Jungkook entered. Recognition immediately appeared in the elderly man's eyes. Jungkook, the younger man, froze. He hadn't heard that voice in years. The old man slowly approached. I thought I might never see you again. The memories crashed into him like a tidal wave, because this wasn't just any bookstore. This was the place where everything had begun. And everything had ended. The owner carefully disappeared into the back room. Minutes later he returned holding a small wooden box. Dust covered its surface. Time had left its marks. Jungkook stared at it. His entire body trembled. I found this while cleaning the storage room, the old man said gently. It belonged to him. Silence consumed the world. Jungkook could barely breathe. Slowly he opened the box. Inside rested an old camera, a faded train ticket, and a sealed letter. His name was written on the envelope, in handwriting he would recognize even after 1,000 years. The tears came before he could stop them, because some wounds never truly disappear, they simply wait patiently, quietly, until the past finally decides to come home. Jungkook's hands shook so violently that the letter nearly slipped from his fingers. The faded envelope carried the weight of years. The handwriting was unmistakable, gentle, steady, alive in a way memories should not be. For a long moment he simply stared at his own name written across the paper. The world outside the bookstore continued moving. Cars passed, rain tapped softly against the windows, people laughed somewhere in the distance. But inside that small room time had stopped. The elderly owner remained silent. Understood that some reunions, even with memories, deserved privacy. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said quietly before walking away. Jungkook nodded. His throat felt impossibly tight. Slowly he broke the seal. The paper inside had yellowed with age. The first sentence stole the air from his lungs. "If you're reading this, then life probably didn't go the way we promised each other." His vision blurred. He closed his eyes, but the words remained. The voice behind them remained, warm, familiar, unforgettable. The letter continued. "I know you, Jungkook, you'll blame yourself, you'll carry things that were never yours to carry, you'll smile so nobody worries, and you'll pretend that silence means strength. Please don't do that, please don't turn your heart into a prison." A tear rolled down his cheek, then another. The years he had spent holding everything together suddenly felt unbearably heavy, because every sentence understood him, every word knew the person he would become, the person he had become. Outside, thunder echoed across the gray sky. The storm had returned, and so had the pain he thought he had buried. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Jimin paced across the living room. His phone remained untouched on the table, no messages, no calls, nothing. Taehyung sat by the window. The worry on his face was impossible to hide. "He wouldn't leave without a reason," Taehyung murmured. Jimin stopped walking. "But why wouldn't he tell us?" The question carried frustration, not anger, just sadness. For so long they had accepted Jungkook's silence because they believed it was his nature. Now they were beginning to understand something far more painful. Silence wasn't who Jungkook was, it was armor, carefully built, carefully maintained, and perhaps nobody had ever asked why he needed it in the first place. Taehyung suddenly stood. "We should look for him." Jimin looked up. Older man hesitated, then his eyes landed on the photograph still resting on the coffee table, the torn photograph, the missing face. "The hidden past." "Maybe," Taehyung said slowly, "we need to find the parts of his life he never showed us." At that exact moment, hundreds of kilometers away in his own memories, Jungkook reached the final page of the letter. The handwriting became slightly messier, as if the writer had been rushing or perhaps running out of time. "There's something I never told you, not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I knew you'd carry my fears as if they were your own. If one day I'm gone, promise me something. Promise me you won't disappear with me. Live loudly, laugh without guilt, find people who stay and let them love you." Jungkook's breathing faltered. His fingers tightened around the paper, the promise. He had broken every single part of it. He had disappeared, he had hidden himself, he had pushed away everyone who cared. Because surviving had felt like betrayal, the old guilt returned, that terrible, familiar guilt. Why him? Why was he the one left behind? The question had haunted him for years. The accident itself remained etched into his soul. A rainy winter evening, slippery roads, one phone call, one moment that separated an entire lifetime into before and after. Jungkook had arrived too late, just minutes too late. And ever since then he had convinced himself that happiness belonged to other people, not him, never him. The elderly bookstore owner returned carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside Jungkook. "You still blame yourself, don't you?" The younger man remained silent. The old man sighed. He always worried about that. Jungkook slowly looked up. "He talked about me." A warm smile appeared. "Every day." Answer shattered something deep inside him. "He said you carried the world on your shoulders." The rain intensified. He hoped one day you'd learn that even strong people deserve to rest. Jungkook lowered his head. The tears came quietly, not dramatic, not loud, simply years of pain finally finding a way out back in Seoul. Evening approached. Jimin sat alone inside Jungkook's room. For the first time he allowed himself to truly observe it. The room was neat, almost too neat. Everything had a place, nothing appeared out of order, as if chaos itself wasn't allowed to exist. On the bookshelf sat rows of carefully arranged books, poetry, photography, travel journals, small fragments of a person they had never fully known. Then Jimin noticed something unusual. A tiny pressed flower hidden inside one of the books, old, fragile, protected between pages. He carefully picked it up. Beneath it rested a handwritten note. "Some memories bloom even after they're gone." No signature, no explanation, only those words. Jimin's chest tight. How lonely had Jungkook been? How many nights had he spent talking to ghosts while everyone else believed he was okay? The realization was unbearable. Taehyung appeared at the doorway. "What did you find?" Jimin looked toward him. "I think." His voice trembled. "I think we've only known half of him." Rain continued throughout the night. Inside the old bookstore, Jungkook remained seated with the wooden box resting on his lap. The camera inside caught his attention. Carefully he turned it on. To his surprise, it still worked. Dozens of old photographs remained stored within its memory. Summer festivals, coffee shops, sunsets over the Han River, shared laughter, dreams that once felt eternal. Then he found the final picture his breath caught. It was a photograph of himself standing beneath cherry blossoms, smiling without hesitation. Looking directly at the camera, looking alive. The timestamp showed one day before everything changed. On the screen another message appeared, a digital note he had never seen before. "No matter what happens tomorrow, don't forget this version of yourself. The version that knows how to be happy, the version I believe in." The tears returned. because somewhere along the way Jungkook had abandoned that person. He had locked him away behind grief, behind fear, behind silence. And now, after years of darkness, the past was asking him a question he never wanted to answer. If the people we lose still wish for our happiness, why do we punish ourselves for surviving? Sighed. The storm slowly began to weaken. For the first time in many years, Jungkook realized that perhaps the deepest wound inside him wasn't losing someone he loved. Perhaps it was believing that he no longer deserved to be loved afterward. Morning arrived quietly, wrapped in silver clouds and the faint scent of rain lingering over the old neighborhood. Jungkook had not slept. The wooden box remained on the small table beside him. The letter was folded carefully, its edges touched countless times throughout the night. Outside the bookstore window, life continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. People hurried to work. Children laughed on their way to school. The world kept moving. It always did. The elderly owner brought fresh coffee and placed it beside him. You look exactly like him when you're thinking too much, the old man said with a gentle smile. Jungkook lowered his gaze. He used to say that too. Old man nodded. He worried about you more than anyone else. Silence settled between them, not painful, just heavy with memories. After several moments, Jungkook finally asked the question that had lived inside him for years. He ever blame me? The old man looked genuinely surprised. Blame you? Jungkook's fingers tightened around the cup. Not being there. Answer came without hesitation. Never. One word. It had struck deeper than 1,000 explanations. Jungkook stared at the steam rising from his coffee. But if I had arrived earlier, the old man shook his head. Young man, grief always tries to rewrite the past. His voice was calm, wise. It whispers that tragedy could have been prevented if only we had been stronger, faster, better. The bookstore seemed quieter than ever. But life isn't a story that obeys our regrets. Jungkook closed his eyes. The sentence echoed inside him. For years he had built an entire identity around guilt. Without that guilt, who was he? What remained? The thought frightened him. Back in Seoul, Jimin stood before the large window of the apartment, watching the rainwater slide down the glass. Taehyung was making coffee. Neither had spoken much that morning. The emptiness Jungkook left behind felt strangely enormous. Jimin held the pressed flower he had found the previous night. Its faded petals looked delicate, yet they had survived years hidden inside a book. Perhaps memories worked the same way. Taehyung finally broke the silence. When was the last time we asked him if he was happy? Jimin remained quiet. The answer was obvious. They never had. They asked if he was tired, if he had eaten, if work was stressful, but happiness no. Because everyone assumed Jungkook was naturally strong, naturally cheerful, naturally okay, and assumptions, Jimin realized, could become another form of distance. His heart felt unbearably heavy. Meanwhile, Jungkook stepped outside the bookstore for the first time since arriving. The neighborhood looked smaller than he remembered. The old bakery still stood on the corner. The convenience store remained unchanged. Even the park nearby seemed untouched by time. His footsteps carried him forward automatically, until he reached the riverside. The Han River stretched endlessly beneath gray skis. Memories crashed against him, laughter, promises, dreams spoken without fear. He could almost hear that familiar voice again. You worry too much about tomorrow. Younger version of himself laughed. And you don't worry enough. That's why we're friends. Memory disappeared with the wind. Jungkook sat on a nearby bench. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply remember, not to punish himself, not to drown in guilt. Just to remember the happiness had been real, the love had been real. And perhaps losing someone did not erase the beauty of having known them. A small realization formed within him. Pain and gratitude could exist together. One did not destroy the other. His phone suddenly vibrated. This time it was Jimin calling. The screen glowed in his hand. He stared at it. The old version of himself would have ignored it, made excuses, created more distance. Yet the words from the letter returned. Find people who stay and let them love you. His thumb hesitated, then pressed accept. For several seconds neither spoke, until Jimin's quiet voice emerged. Are you okay? Such a simple question. Something about it felt different now. Jungkook looked at the river. The rain had finally stopped. No, he answered honestly. The silence on the other side deepened, yet there was no panic, no judgment, only understanding. Jimin spoke again. You want to tell me why? Jungkook's chest tightened. Years of habits fought against the invitation. Years of silence demanded protection, but exhaustion was stronger now. He closed his eyes. There are things about me, he whispered, that I never wanted anyone to carry. Jimin listened. The city noises faded into the distance. You don't have to carry everything alone. Gentleness in those words nearly broke him, because nobody had ever said them so sincerely. Nobody had stayed long enough to prove them. And yet Jimin remained. Taehyung remained, even after all the walls, even after all the distance. A strange warmth spread through his heart, unfamiliar, fragile hope. Hours later, Jungkook returned to Seoul. The journey home felt different, not easier, just different. The apartment door opened quietly. Jimin and Taehyung were waiting. Neither rushed toward him, neither demanded explanations. They simply looked relieved. Taehyung smiled first. Welcome back. Ordinary words carried extraordinary comfort. Jungkook removed his shoes slowly. For a moment nobody moved, then Jimin walked closer. His expression was gentle. We made dinner. Jungkook almost laughed. The simplicity of it all, no dramatic confrontations, no demands, just dinner, just home. His eyes drifted toward the living room. The photograph on the table remained there, the torn photograph, the hidden past. He walked toward it carefully. He picked it up. For years he had hidden that missing face, protected it from the world, protected himself. But perhaps some memories deserved sunlight. His fingers touched the damaged edge. He was my best friend, Jungkook said quietly. The room became completely silent. Jimin and Taehyung listened. He always believed people could heal. A sad smile appeared. Never did. Confession felt heavier than any secret, yet strangely. The world did not collapse, nobody left, nobody turned away. Taehyung approached slowly. And now, Jungkook looked down at the photograph. The answer did not come immediately, because healing was not a destination, it was a terrifying choice, a decision to keep living despite pain, a decision to trust despite loss. The letter inside his jacket seemed warmer somehow. He remembered its final message. Let them love you. Jungkook inhaled deeply. The years of silence still lived inside him, the wounds remained, the grief remained, but perhaps, for the first time in a very long time, he no longer wanted to face them alone.